Yeah, let's get started. So, hi everyone. First off, there is our safe harbor notice. Second off, welcome to building a custom visualization, specifically learning how to extend your dashboards with custom visualizations. I'm Kayla. I'm a software engineer here at New Relic, and I work on the developer experience team. So, to start off, what exactly is a custom visualization? Well, they are configurable React views that are able to be shared on dashboards, and they can be developed by users and then also published by users. So for those who are not familiar with custom visualizations, if you've ever built a dashboard, you've probably used the query builder to query some NURCL data, and then you're given a set of visualizations to choose from. So for example, right here, hopefully everyone can see this. Yes. You can see that when you have this query, select count from transaction, you're given this billboard type. You can also select a bullet. You can look at a JSON, and you're able to choose from these pre-selected visualization types. And this can be great, but sometimes this might not serve your exact purpose. Maybe you want to create something new or explore the data in a new way. And this is sort of where custom visualizations come in. So like I said, they're configurable React views that are able to be shared on dashboards. And you can create them via the NR1 CLI in something called a nerd pack. So a nerd pack is very similar to just a regular NPM package, except when you publish it, New Relic One is actually able to add it to our platform to use and to extend. So an example of this is this observability maps package that you can find under our instant observability marketplace. So in here, we have a few different things. If we look in the what's inside, we have a visualization and we have an app. So you're able to create these things that can extend our platform and then actually use them to see stuff in a new way. So if we open up this launcher, we can actually look at this new app or this new view within New Relic. Custom visualizations are very similar in that you are also able to do this, but you are also able to add them to dashboards and provide some additional configuration. So to see custom visualizations within New Relic, you have to go into the custom visualizations app. And you can look at the ones that you have subscribed to previously. So for example, we have this circular progress bar. So here we see this messaging to tell us what information it needs to actually work. So we select an account and we just add that in there. And then we have this custom visualization. So in this session, we're actually going to build our own visualization. We're going to create a more enhanced view of the billboard chart. So to show you what that looks like, sorry. Got to open up my files again. Google crashed right before this started. So if we look here, this is a sketch for what the visualization that we're going to be creating today looks like. It's very similar to the billboard, except it has actually the time series data over a certain amount of time in the back, and it's showing whether it's trending upwards or trending downwards and color coding based on that. Or if there is no trend, it just turns gray. So to get started, I actually created a fork of an existing nerd pack that has a lot of utilities to create visualizations. This is our Victory Visualizations nerd pack. You can actually find it on our public GitHub if you want to explore more of it. I created a fork and removed some of the other visualizations so that we can focus on creating this line billboard type. So to get started, we are going to want to first run use npm use and then npm install. Then we're going to want to start up our visualization by running npm start. And then we're going to want to open up new Relic 1 with this nerdpacks equals local on tag. So hopefully this loads very soon. Otherwise, we'll just do this. So to access our visualization, we'll want to go into the Custom Visualizations app, click on the visualization that we're looking for. Here it's been labeled line billboard because it's a combination of a line chart and a billboard chart, and it has this local tag to know that we are serving it up locally. So when we click into here, we're going to see that we have this empty state message that provides us with some information for what type of query that we're looking for. So if we actually dive into the template that I've created here, you'll see that we have a few things going on. We have this React component that has some prop types. We're going to get back to what those props are and what they look like pretty soon. And then we also have the return value here. So we have this auto sizer component, which gives us back a width and height as the child. This actually comes from our NR1 CLI, NR1 component library. So if you want to learn more about that, you can actually go onto our developer site and we have all of our components listed. But when you're developing on NR1, it's globally available for you to import. We also have this NURCL query component, which accepts a query, an account ID. So this gives us back some data based on some query that we provide into it, and then gives us back as the children either data, loading, or error. So in our code right now, if it's loading, it's going to return back a spinner, another component from our NR1 SDK. And we also have the error being returned. And if the data is equal to null, then we have this error message being shown. If there's no data, we actually return a no data state that gives some information about increasing the time range or trying a different action to get some data into the visualization. And then lastly, we have just right now some default information being passed back when the data has loaded successfully. So if we go into here and we just put in some query, so let's actually take what that has here and we update that, you'll see that we're given back the heading text with the account ID and then the query that we have actually just put in. So to get started, to build our visualization, the first thing that we're going to want to do is actually validate that the query that we're putting in is correct. So if we look at what's coming in here, we have this NURCL query as a prop. So where does this exactly come from, or how does this get configured? Well, that's another part of what's in this visualizations folder. There's an NR1 JSON file that has all this different type of information. It has the schema type, has an ID, which is a unique identifier, the display name, which corresponds to what you see up here, and then this configuration property. And in here, we have an array of configuration properties. So the first one is NURCL query, which is given the name that allows us to access it in the React component. It's type namespace, meaning that it's just an object that will accept, that has different properties underneath it. So our NURCL query needs to have an account ID and a query. So those are the two ones that are underneath it, and they both have their own specific types. The account ID, which allows this account picker to pop up over here, and then a query, which allows us to actually query from, actually use the NURCL editing to create a good query for us to use our data. So if we go back into here, we can see that we actually get that from our props. So this NURCL query comes from what is configured in the NR1 JSON. And in here, we have some validation. We want to make sure that we actually have this available before we're able to use it. And once we put that in, then we are able to actually return the values that are below rather than that empty state, which is why when we put that in there, we were able to get the display of the visualization. So let's start actually building our visualization. Before we start using our data, we're going to want to validate that the query that we have is what we actually want. So the first thing that we can do to do this is actually just console log the data to see what it looks like. So if we pull up what's here, do some inspect. So the data that gets returned is actually an array with a single object within it. And in here, it has two properties. It has data, which contains the values that we will want to use to create our visualization, and then this metadata property. So we know that we want a query in the form of select count of something from some event type over some time series. So we can actually use this property that is available on the metadata to determine if our query that we've actually put in there is correct. So that's the first thing that we're going to want to do, is actually validate that the query that is being provided is correct. So we're going to write a function that is called NRCL input is valid. And from there, we're going to want to take in the raw data that is returned. And we're going to want to pull off that metadata property from that array. So we'll take the first item because there's only one value within that array. And we're going to want to validate that a few things about this. One, that there's only one select value being used. So we'll want to make sure that the value of groups is an array the size of 1. Length is equal to 1. And we're also going to want to validate that the type of the group is actually a function. So we'll take that as well. And we'll also want to validate that the count is correct. So I'm just going to copy and paste exactly what I have here, so you don't have to watch me write this out the entire time. And here you go. So if all of this is correct, then it should be returned true. So now what we can do over here is actually validate that the NRCL input is correct by saying if this dot NRCL input is valid. If it's not valid, then we're going to want to return an error state. And we'll just do this NRCL query error. Right now, we can just leave the description as nothing. So we can validate that this actually works by changing the query that is available here. So if we close this down and we change this to something like this, you'll see some error on there. Or, well, that's a different error, but if we do something like this, you'll see that we get that NRCL syntax error. So now that we've validated that, we can actually go and start building our visualization. So we're going to want to start out with an SVG. So this is the main way that, you're building visualizations or drawing anything on the browser. So we'll start off with an SVG, and we're going to take that width and height that is available from the auto sizer and also use it to create the view box. Let's change our query back to what it was before. Now we're going to want to actually use some components from the Victory library. So like I mentioned before, this nerd pack is actually built on top in conjunction with Victory charts. So we're going to just import some of the utilities that they have. Specifically, they have a component called Victory line, which allows us to easily draw a line chart when we supply some data. So within here, sorry, we'll provide the victory line. And we're going to want to supply it with some props. Specifically, we're going to want to say the width and height of it. And we're also going to want to say the standalone property is equal to false because the parent is an SVG. It's not standing alone. Otherwise, it would draw it as within an SVG as well. So now we have this component. It just has a line going across. We're going to actually want to provide it with the data that it needs. So in order to do that, we are going to need to take the data from the return of the NURCL query and put it in a format that is useful for the victory line chart. So the data that it accepts is an array with an X and Y property. So we're going to want to actually take that data and write some function that is able to transform it into the way that we want it to look like. And we can look back at console logging the data to make sure that it is looking the way that we want it to. So we can see that what we get off of here is this X and Y property. X indicating the time, Y indicating the aggregate value. So for here, it's the number of transactions at each different interval. So we're going to want to write a function to transform this data, and we'll just call it transform data. We'll pass in the raw data again. And we're going to want to actually return a new array that just has the X and Y properties. So we'll do the same thing that we did above, take the first value. And let's call this line data. And we'll map over X and Y. And then just return that object. All right. And now we can say return line data. Now down here, we can pull that off here. And supply it to our line chart. All right. So now you can see the data popping up as a line chart. Right now, it's not looking really that great. So in the sketch that I showed earlier, we had it as a faded opacity. It had a stroke width of 4. So I'm just going to apply those styles directly onto here for that. And right now, we're not going to worry about the stroke because we're going to want to change it based on whether it's increasing or decreasing. We're just going to default it to blue. So that's looking more like it. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is actually add some label text because we have that billboard that displays the number of transactions or whatever data that you're aggregating. So we're going to use another victory component called victory label. We can import that from victory as well. It's going to give me an error. So we want to put this right after the line chart because we want to overlay the victory label over this line element, and it will draw top down. We also know that we wanted to have 2 different lines. If we look back at our sketch, we can see that there is this first, the number, and then the label for what type of data that we're looking at. So in order to do that, we're going to want to pass in a text property that it can accept an array for the different lines that we want to have. And for right now, we're just going to put in some dummy data. We'll say 300 and transactions. So right now it's popping up all the way over in this corner. You can't even see the 300. So we're going to want to position this, and we're going to add some properties to make that happen. Specifically, we're going to want to set the X and Y value for the label, as well as where the label will anchor to, in order to make sure that it will actually stick in the middle of the visualization rather than be up in that top corner. There. And now we're going to also want to apply some styles to make it actually look like the sketch that we have out there. So we're going to apply the style property that it also accepts an array for each one of the styles for each line that is there. And we have this base label styles that we have available within this theme component. So if you see here, we just have a bunch of styles already pre-made. So I can actually import this base label styles from the theme and then just apply it as the first thing here for both of these objects. So not exactly the size that we wanted. So we're going to make the font size a little bit bigger, say 88. And we also want to add in the coloring to be different because it's not that gray for the top one. So we'll add that in. And we'll also adjust the font size of the second line as well. All right. Now that's looking more like it. So the next thing that we want to do is actually get the correct data here. So since we're using always a type count, we're going to want to sum up all the counts over this time period. So we can actually do that by using the same transform data function that we have here and return a new value alongside the line data. So a simple way to do this is say let total equals 0, and then just add total plus y. And y here represents the number of transactions. So we can return that value and then pull it off of here. And lastly, replace this value with the total. All right. So this isn't formatted in the best way. If this number was really large, it would basically fall off the screen. So we want to add some truncation. We actually have a utility within this repo that is for truncating those labels. So we have this formatting, the number ticks that we can actually use in order to make this look a little bit better. So we'll import that from our utils. And this function accepts two properties. The first one is the unit type. Since we're always going to be using count values, we can just set that to count. And then the tick, which is the value that you want to send it, which will be equal to total here. Now it's looking a little bit better. All right. The next thing that we want to do is actually replace this with what this value is, because, for example, if we said instead page view, we would want that to be accurately reflected within here. So let's get that value off of the metadata. If we look back at the data, which is constantly being console logged down here, we can see within metadata that there is this name property that gives us what we're actually looking at. So let's add that over here. We'll say data 0.metadata.name. All right. Now that seems a little more accurate and is looking a lot better. So the last thing that we're going to want to do here to make this, represent what we're trying to get at with this increasing or decreasing is actually be able to tell whether on average this has been decreasing over this time period, increasing, or stayed the same. And so in order to do that, we're going to want to create a function called getColor. So we'll label this color. And once again, we'll pass in the raw data to determine that. So in order to determine this, we're going to use a concept that maybe you learned in grade school or maybe like basic statistics you learned, but it's finding the line of best fit. So to go over really what that means, I have a little diagram over here. So given a set of data, if you try to find what the average is between all of them, try to find this line of best fit, you'll be given a line that has a slope that will either tell you whether there's a positive correlation, negative correlation, or no correlation. So from this, we're able to see whether it's increasing or decreasing or is just staying the same. And in order to find this, we can use a function that is available from this simple statistics library. If we go over here, let's find this. We'll use this function called linear regression that will take in the data that we have and then give us back two properties to find the line of best fit. M, which represents the slope of the line, and B, which represents the vertical intercept of the line. So in this case, we're only really concerned with what the value of M is because we want to know whether it's positive or negative, or if it's equal to 0. So if we go back in here, we can actually use that function, which I had already installed from simple statistics. So another thing to note is that the data that gets passed in is an array of arrays. So it's different than what we had returned previously with these X and Y values. So we're going to want to turn that into data that we can use. So once again, we use this raw data. And we'll say this is data array equals and we'll return X and Y like that. Now we can use this function in order to get this value M. So we'll take M off of this function and pass in the data array. So like I said before, if M is positive, then we're going to want to indicate that there's an upward trend. If it's negative, we're going to want to indicate that there's a downward trend. And if it's 0, we're going to want to show that there is no trend. And in our sketch, we're doing this by color coding. So M positive, green, and negative, red, M equal to 0, gray. So we'll do that return right over here. So if M is greater than 0, return green as the string. m is less than 0. We'll want to return red. And then lastly, if it's neither one of those things, by default, it will be returned gray because it must be 0. All right. Now going back to here, we're going to want to use this to now get the color. So we'll pass in the raw data. I guess here's just like data. And if we go back to our visualization, we can now see, hopefully, that the color will indicate whether it has been going down on average or not. So if we increase the time span since 5 days ago, we can see that. Let's look at transaction. Maybe remove this. It's going up. So the last thing that we can do is maybe we don't necessarily always want to show this green or red or gray default. Maybe we want to make that something that it can be configured by the user. So we can actually go into our enter1 JSON and add a new property. So let's add a property here called, let's give it a name, show color to indicate the trend or something like that. I'm not great with naming. Title. Assign it a type. And we want this to be some sort of switch that a user can turn on and off. So we're going to make it a type Boolean. And lastly, we'll want to give it a description. All right. Now, since we changed this enter1 JSON, we're actually going to want to restart our nerd pack. So it's going to start up again. And hopefully when that's all ready, we can refresh and we'll see a new property that pops up over here. Yeah, here we go. Now we have this Boolean value, but right now it's not doing anything. So in order to use it, we have to pull it off of our props. We'll also want to add some prop validation, but we don't have to worry necessarily about that right now. We can take the name, show color for trend, and now we can actually use this. So if we go back to our colors, which is right here, if this is true, we're going to want to use the function to show the trend. And if not, we'll put some default blue color here. So if I switch this on, now it turns green. Lastly, we can just add it into our prop types validation. Show color for trend. And there we have it. Now we have a visualization that has a few properties that can be configured, takes in some NURCL data, and is a new way to look at a billboard chart. So the next step that we could take would be to publish this and actually be able to add it and share it to a dashboard. You can actually follow along with those steps on the developer website. So they have all sorts of guides that are able to outline how to publish your nerd pack and how to actually access it and be able to use it and share it on a dashboard. And yeah, I guess that's the last thing that I had to show you guys. I spoke a lot quicker than I did when I was practicing. Um, Thank you so much for following along. If you would want to actually go over this and try this out for yourself, there is a fork of this template available on my public GitHub. And yeah, thank you so much for attending our session today. I hope you learned a lot about creating custom visualizations. If you have any questions, I can stick around and answer them in the last 10 minutes of this. Yeah, let me share that. Already on it, Lewis. Are there any questions that I can answer? Lewis asks, are there other guides getting started with building custom viz? There are. There's so many guides that are available within the dev site. So if you go over into, sorry, I wasn't prepared for this. Oh, yeah. Here are some guides that we have for customizing visualizations with the SDK components, customizing the visualization with configuration options. If you look through here, you can also find all the configuration options that are available for visualizations. But yeah, all of that can be found on the developer website, which has a lot of great resources. All right, if there's nothing else, I can stop sharing my screen.